After the aforementioned showdown, or whatever it is you want to call it, between the two leads, we're treated with additional boring stuff and even more non-linear details, one of which is something I spent a lot of time complaining over a few minutes ago. In separate locations, Ecks and Sever are simultaneously gathering info on each other, which leads to Ecks and the audience learning that Sever once had a family, which explains her current motivation in getting revenge against Gant. Even though we were told countless times that she's supposed to be a cold-hearted assassin and shouldn't really need a reason, but whatever. Take what you can get, I guess. While Sever learns that Ecks once had a wife that presumably died in a car explosion. But lo and behold, that's when we learn that his dead wife, Ven Ecks, is not only alive and well, she's also now married to Gant using the pseudonym Rain Gant. How did all this happen, you ask? Well, 7 years prior, Robert Gant, formerly known as Agent Clark, was Ecks' superior. One day, as Ecks was prepping to leave for a new assignment, Gant, or Clark, whatever, secretly detonated 2 explosives that destroyed the car Ecks was supposed to ride in, as well as the car Gant and Ven were supposed to enter. Unaware that Ecks survived the explosion, Gant took Ven away with him, went underground with a new identity for both of them, married her, and then obtained a much more powerful position under the DIA. Pretty elaborate, I know. To put it in layman's terms, the guy conjured up this whole scheme just to steal another dude's wife. Yeah, 'cause why not? Makes a little bit more sense than just going on Craigslist, I guess. And apparently, as I just stated, one of the big reasons why he chose to rebirth himself in the form of Robert Gant was so he could assume a higher control over the DIA. Does the movie ever explain why he had to follow this complex agenda to become a richer and more powerful person through a new persona, rather than simply sticking with his former identity? You tell me. And for some odd reason, after all these years, Ecks has been completely oblivious to the fact that his wife is still living. He's a frickin' FBI agent. He should have the contacts, and therefore the means, of discovering the fact that the bodies of both Ven and Agent Clark were never recovered or identified in the decimated car. Did he suddenly forget the accessibilities he has under his profession? Did the writers even know what an FBI agent can do? Well, obviously not, since apparently they don't have a clue how the DIA operates. And if anything, they even seem to confuse the DIA with the Yakuza, as Gant personally requested one of the men employed to protect Michael, his son, to commit suicide right in front of him, describing it as the quote-unquote honorable thing. Wow. So blah blah blah, Ecks is somehow framed for shooting Julio Martin, despite the fact that it was clearly Sever who did that after the major shootout in the street. There were even witnesses there who could have proven that. He's escorted in a bus, which seems pretty redundant, since the police are only transporting one guy, and then Sever, somehow knowing Ecks is on the bus and where it's heading, fires on them, causing Ecks to break free. A very slow chase sequence ensues, ending with Ecks crashing in a junkyard. Sever, rather than shoot him, hands him a piece of paper detailing where Ven is located, and then leaves. Ecks finds Ven at this aquarium, where the two share a kind of mediocre reaction to seeing each other again, after 7 years of believing the other was dead. Being breathless at a moment like this is one thing, but emotionless? No, that's a whole new ballgame. Awkwardly edited into this scene is a flashback to the last day they saw each other, when Gant activated the bomb that blew up the cars Ecks and Ven were supposed to be in, respectively. Then Ven drops a new bombshell on Ecks. Get it? Bombshell? Explaining to him that Michael is actually his son, not Gant's. Whoa! That would have meant so much to me if I cared. Come to think of it, how in the world is it even possible that Michael can be the son of both Ecks and Ven, considering the fact that both of these characters are of Hispanic backgrounds, while Michael seems to resemble a full-blood white kid? Something is really, really off here. And while we're on the subject, is Gant completely oblivious to the fact that Michael isn't his son? I mean, there's never even a time where that's hinted during his scenes. Considering the pregnancy process lasts only 3/4 of the year, assuming this movie's universe doesn't ignore that basic factoid too, like what they did with the DIA. How long of a gap was it between the time Gant took Ven, married her, and then saw the birth of Michael without ever appearing suspicious of whether or not this boy was actually his. Because Ven was already pregnant the day she last saw Ecks, as she pointed out in the aquarium. Does Gant just suck at basic math and biology? Or did he rush his way into his new life of marriage within a matter of days? It sure would have been really convenient if there had been a moment where he confessed that he was already pretty certain that Michael was actually X's son, but decided to raise him as his own. Instead, we get a less fleshed out idea that just comes off as even more cringy than his plan to steal Ven. Did I ever mention that this movie has sucky writing? The two meet with Sever parked outside, who drives off with them, with Gant and his men in hot pursuit. Apparently, Sever also knows Michael is X's biological son. How does she know that exactly? Why, contrived plot convenience, of course. Which, just in case you haven't been paying attention, is one of this movie's prime ingredients. Sever drives the two to her hideout in this abandoned warehouse, where Ecks is finally introduced to his son. Ven and Michael are then relocated to higher ground, while Ecks and Sever prepare themselves for Gant's oncoming storm, which is weird when you try to remember that this movie's subtitle is Ecks versus Sever. A major fight scene then ensues between Gant's squadron and Ecks and Sever. I sure wish any of it was enough to keep me entertained, but the movie flat out failed to deliver once again. When there's no shooting going on, we're treated with a variety of large explosions, which sometimes cause a bigger explosion to occur, which in turn creates a chain reaction that results in an even larger explosion. And it just won't end. I like major movie shootouts and explosions as much as the next guy, but this was just too much. Remember when I compared this movie to anything that Michael Bay directs? Well, if you ever get around to watching this stink pile, be sure to check it out during a double feature with any of the Transformers movies, and you'll catch a remarkable difference in quality. Bay's movies have interesting, witty characters, spliced with action that's at least fun and comprehensible to watch. This, on the other hand, is on a completely different level. Its repeated use of explosions goes on far longer than necessary, and even reaches the point that it actually becomes tedious to watch. I didn't even think that was possible, but here we are. You want to know what's even more awkward about this whole scene? Ecks and Sever aren't just shooting at and killing various members of the Mafia or some secret underground crime organization. They're killing DIA agents, men that actually fight to keep our society safe, and I'm pretty sure most of them even have a family back home. Did no one behind the screen ever stop to bring that up? Etc., etc., etc. Gant eventually has a brief encounter with Ecks. Ecks asks him why he abandoned his previous life. Gant responds with, "Come on, you should know by now." What should we know by now? And how should we know it? I had to get rid of Agent Clark so that there could be a Robert Gant, which enabled him to start a new life of greater authority, run solely on power and profit, as he so poetically put it. Does he ever hint as to why he couldn't have acquired any of these remarkable feats as Agent Clark? Or how becoming a new guy with a likely false background was able to make all that possible? Come on, you should know by now. This movie does not bother to make anything clearly understood. Blah blah blah. The action continues inside the warehouse, where Sever kills off the remaining forces, and then she has her short standoff with Gant's right-hand man, A.J. Ross, played by Ray Park, who some of you may remember as Darth Maul in The Headless Horseman. Oh, and his character here is nicknamed the Prince of Darkness. Why is that, you inquire? How many times do I have to tell you? I don't have the answers here. The movie never explains why he has that pseudonym, nor is there ever a scene where a character calls him that, except once in the scene where Julio Martin was filling Ecks with the details of his primary assignment earlier in the film. After that, Ross's alias is never brought up again. In that one scene, they could have just omitted that one line of dialogue about the Prince of Darkness nickname, and it would have changed nothing about the movie or the character. And you know what's crazier about this fight between Sever and Ross? Not only does it last longer, but it's much better choreographed than the earlier fight scene between Ecks and Sever. Again, if you keep the movie's subtitle in mind, you can understand why the execution of this second brawl is a little peculiar to the viewer. So Sever kills Ross just as Gant enters the room, now the last man standing. I have no idea why in the world he's being this stupid, considering he no longer has his army around him. who were all taken out by just two individuals who are not only very cross with him, but are obviously in that building right now. You'd think he'd hide somewhere and pull out a radio to call for more reinforcements, but no, that would have been too smart. Gant discovers the whereabouts of Vin and Michael, or Rain and Michael, whatever. Ecks comes in to fill Vin in on the missing parts of Gant's agenda, including his using of Michael to smuggle the soft-kill robot across the sea. Gant then pulls out a device to remove the robot from Michael's body, only to quickly discover it's already been removed. That's when Sever shows up from behind, finally face to face with the man who stole her life. Oh, and fun fact, did you know that Lucy Liu and Greg Henry previously appeared together in the movie Payback? Sever then shoots Gant in the arm before activating the soft kill's poison injector, which kills him in seconds. Yeah, I didn't mention earlier that Sever already removed the robot from Michael's arm in an earlier scene, using an identical scanner device to whatever it was Gant used in the last scene. I'd love to know how she was able to pinpoint where the contraption was nesting in Michael's body, considering it was already established that Softkill was designed to be an untraceable machine. But whatever, this movie isn't familiar with the word consistency anyway. Anyway, removing it from Michael, Sever then implanted the microscopic bot into the tip of a bullet, which just so happened to be the bullet she fired into Gant. I can only speculate how the robot could have survived being fired out of a gun like that, and penetrate a person's hide without being damaged, but it manages to kill Gant, so what do I know? Shortly afterwards, more officers show up on the scene to assess what happened. Sever escapes before anyone could spot her in the area. However, Ecks, lacking any sufficient evidence to protect his name and prove that Gant had been a malevolent scumbag since day one, is apprehended and detained for the slaying of I don't even know how many police officers. It's a sad thing, I know, but it's the law. At the same time, it's actually pretty reassuring that the movie was at least able to get that part of law enforcement correct, considering everything else they'd messed up. But I guess this can at least go to show that there is still some form of hope for this otherwise poor writing in this piece of this is totally not how the movie ends, people. Rather than being detained and likely indicted for hundreds of thousands of dollars in property damages and the deaths of a broad number of cops, Ecks is peacefully escorted off the premises and remains united with his new family. Last I checked, he was still suspected to be the culprit behind the shooting of Julio, but I doubt even the movie remembers that, let alone any of us viewers. Well, except for me, anyway. But who cares? Happy ending for all. Except for the families of the slain officers who were merely following orders from their commander, and were therefore not technically evil. But other than that, happy ending. The following morning, Sever catches up with Ecks on a catwalk, asking him to take care of his family, which Ecks kindly obliges, before Sever suddenly vanishes from his sight, without even making a sound, no less. I guess she studied stealth tactics with Batman at the ninja monastery. The end. Oh boy. This movie is an absolute train wreck from beginning to end. Before I initially watched it, I'd hoped the movie would at least manage to succeed in the so bad it's good status, kind of like Troll 2 or Battlefield Earth. But disappointingly, it flat out fails to come anywhere even close to that height. Depth, however you want to look at it. Anything that could have been salvaged to redeem this movie's poor quality was lost at sea shortly after the ship set sail. Minus the moments when a character would occasionally look drowsy or emotionless during a particular moment, the acting isn't too bad or cringy. But other than that, the movie has very little to offer us in exchange for our time. The plot is almost completely devoid of any linear details, the characters are unlikable and bland, the scenarios are unrealistic, the plot holes are all over the place, and probably worst of all, for a big-budget action flick, the action scenes are so repetitive that they just come off as tedious. Put in the right hands, the movie could have been fantastic. I know it really could have. I mean, on paper, as I explained in the beginning, the story sounds very gripping, and the film already had the finances and a collection of recognizable, top-notch actors at the helm. And yet somehow, everything that should have been properly handled was thrown out the window in favor of some of the most lucrative, nonsensical ideas that I've ever been forced to bear witness to in any form of fiction. The movie was made by a Thai director named Wick Chaos Ayananda, if I'm even pronouncing that correctly. but he credited himself under his nickname Chaos, if that's not already a poor sign of the movie's quality when you first watch it. He blamed the movie's turnout on the producers, who he claimed constantly interfered during the production, among various other issues they handed to him. He so badly hated the result of the movie that he purposefully showed up to the premiere a half hour late, knowing what a mess it was. I wish I knew more about the movie's background history to give my own opinion for how it became what it is, including who should receive the bulk of the blame, if not everyone involved. But alas, because of its reputation, the movie's history is so obscure that I can't really find any additional info on it, which would have been so much fun to explore and also to share here. Battlefield Earth at least has a relatively lengthy disclosure of its history. In fact, there's so much info on its backstory that when the movie was reviewed by the Smeghead from the channel Cinematic Excrement, he was able to dedicate the first 6 minutes of his review on the movie's history alone. And that review is hysterical, by the way. I'll even include the link in the description below. Overall, Ballistic, Ecks vs. Sever is an absolute disaster from beginning to end. Not much more can be said about it from here. Terrible writing, off-balance directing, lack of exciting action, uninteresting and forgettable characters, an outrageous amount of plot holes, and actors who deserve so much more than this. Unless you can gather an entire party together that finds entertainment in mocking a movie that fails on every conceivable level every couple of minutes, I'd suggest you avoid this stink pile at all costs, no matter how cheap you can find it on Amazon. Whew. Pardon me, but that is more than enough internet for today.